Jimbo by Algernon Blackwood. Read by Adrian Praetzellis. Chapter 3. The Shock. One immediate result of Miss Lake's indiscretion was that the children preferred to play on the other side of the garden, the side farthest from the empty house. A spiked railing here divided them from a field in which cows disported themselves, and as a bull also was sometimes there, the field was strictly out of bounds. In this spiked railing, not far from the great shrubberies where the Indians increased and multiplied, there was a swinging gate. The children swung on it whenever they could. They called this express trains, and the fact that it was forbidden only added to their pleasure. When opened at its widest, the gate would swing them with a rush through the air, past the pillars with a click, out into the field, and then back again into the garden. It was bad for the hinges, and it was also bad for the garden, because the gate was frequently left open after these carnivals, and the cows got in and trod the flowers down. The children were not afraid of the cows, but they held the bull in great horror. And these trivial things have been mentioned here because of the part they played in Jimbo's subsequent adventures. It was only 10 days or so after Miss Lake's sudden departure when Jimbo managed one evening to elude the vigilance of his lawful guardians, and wandered off unnoticed among the laburnums on the front lawn. From the laburnums he passed successfully to the first laurel shrubbery, and thence he executed a clever flank movement and entered the carriage drive in the rear. The rest was easy, and he soon found himself at the lodge gate. For some moments he peered through the iron grating, and pondered on the seductiveness of the dusty road and of the ditch beyond. To his surprise he found presently that the gate was moving outwards. It was yielding to his weight. One thing leads easily to another sometimes, and the open gate led easily onto the seductive road. The result was that, a minute later, Jimbo was chasing butterflies along the green lane and throwing stones into the water of the ditch. It was the evening of a hot summer's day, and the butterflies were still out in force. Jimbo's delight was intense. The joy of finding himself alone where he had no right to be put everything else out of his head, and for some time he wandered on, oblivious of all but the intoxicating scent of freedom, and the difficulty in choosing between so many butterflies and such a magnificently dirty ditch. At first he yielded to the seductions of the ditch. He caught a big sleepy beetle, and put it in a violet leaf, and sent it sailing out to sea, and when it landed on the farther shore he found a still bigger leaf, and sent it forth on a voyage in another direction with a cargo of daisy petals and a hairy caterpillar for a boatswain's mate. But just as the vessel was getting under way, a butterfly of amazing brilliance floated past insolently under his very nose. Leaving the beetle and the caterpillar to navigate the currents as best they could, he at once gave chase. Cap in hand he flew after the butterfly down the lane, and a dozen times when his cap was just upon it, it sailed away sideways without the least effort and escaped him. Then suddenly the lane took a familiar turning. The ditch stopped abruptly. The hedge on his right fell away altogether. The butterfly danced out of sight into a field, and Jimbo found himself face to face with the one thing in the whole world that could at that time fill him with abject terror: the empty house. He came to a full stop in the middle of the road, and stared up at the windows. He realized for the first time that he was alone, and that it was possible for brilliant sunshine, even on a cloudless day, to become somehow lustreless and dull. The wall showed a deep red in the sunset light. The house was still as the grave. His feet were rooted to the ground, and it seemed as if he could not move a single muscle. And as he stood there, the blood ebbing quickly from his heart, The words of the governess a few days before rushed back into his mind and turned his fear into a dreadful, all-possessing horror. In another minute the battered door would slowly open and the horrible inmate come out to seize him. Already there was a sound of something moving within, and as he gazed, fascinated with terror, a shuddering movement ran over the ivy leaves hanging down from the roof. Then they parted in the middle, and something, he could not in his agony see what, flew out with a whirring sound into his face, and then vanished over his shoulder into the fields. Jimbo did not pause a single second to find out what it was, or to reflect that any ordinary thrush would have made just the same sound. The shock it gave to his heart immediately loosened the muscles of his little legs, and he ran for his very life. But before he actually began to run, he gave one piercing scream for help, and the person he screamed to was the very person who was unwittingly the cause of his distress. It was as though he knew instinctively that the person who had created for him the terror of the empty house with its horrible inmate was also the only person who could properly banish it and undo the mischief before it was too late. He shrieked for help to the governess, Miss Ethel Lake. Of course there was no answer, but the noise of the air whistling in his ears as his feet flew over the road in a cloud of dust. There was no friendly butcher's cart, no baker's boy or farmer with his dog and gun. The road was deserted. There was not even the beetle or the caterpillar. He was beyond reach of help. Jimbo ran for his life, but unfortunately he ran in the wrong direction. Instead of going the way he had come, where the lodge gates were ready to receive him not a quarter of a mile away, he fled in the opposite direction. It so happened that the lane flanked the field where the cows lived, but the cows were nothing compared to a creature from the empty house, and even bulls seemed friendly. The boy was over the 5-barred gate in a twinkling, and halfway across the field before he heard a heavy, thunderous sound behind him. Either the thing had followed him into the field, or it was the bull. As he raced, he managed to throw a glance over his shoulder and saw a huge dark mass bearing down upon him at terrific speed. It must be the bull, he reflected. The bull grown to the size of an elephant, and it appeared to him to have 2 immense black wings that flapped at its sides and helped it forward, making a whirring noise like the arms of a great windmill. This sight added to his speed, but he could not last very much longer. Already his body ached all over, and the frantic effort to get breath nearly choked him. There, before him, not so very far away now, was the swinging gate. If only he could get there in time to scramble over into the garden, he would be safe. It seemed almost impossible, and behind him, meanwhile, the sound of the following creature came closer and closer. Ground seemed to tremble. He could almost feel the breath on his neck. The swinging gate was only 20 yards off, now 10, now only 5. Now he had reached it, at last. He stretched out his hand to seize the top bar, and in another moment he would have been safe in the garden and within easy reach of the house. But before he actually touched the iron rail, a sharp, stinging pain shot across his back. He drew one final breath as he felt himself being lifted up into the air. The horns had caught him just behind the shoulders. There seemed to be no pain after the first shock. He rose high into the air, while the bushes and spiked railing he knew so well sank out of sight beneath him, dwindling curiously in size. At first he thought his head must bump against the sky, but suddenly he stopped rising, and the green earth rushed up as if it would strike him in the face. This meant he was sinking again. The gate and railing flew by underneath him, and the next second he fell with a crash upon the soft grass of the lawn, upon the other side. He had been tossed over the gate into the garden, and the bull could no longer reach him. Before he became wholly unconscious, a composite picture, vivid in its detail, engraved itself deeply with exceeding swiftness, line by line, upon the waxen tablets of his mind. In this picture the thrush that had flown out of the ivy, the empty house itself, and its horrible pursuing inmate were all somehow curiously mingled together with the black wings of the bull, and with his own sensation of rushing, flying headlong through space as he rose and fell in a curve from the creature's horns. And behind it he was conscious that the real author of it all was somewhere in the shadowy background, looking on though to watch the result of her unfortunate mistake. Miss Lake, surely, was not very far away. He associated her with the horror of the empty house as inevitably as taste and smell joined together in the memory of a certain food, and the very last thought in his mind as he sank away into the blackness of unconsciousness was a sort of bitter surprise that the governess had not turned up to save him before it was actually too late. But a certain sense of disappointment mingled with the terror of the shock, for he was dimly aware that Miss Lake had not acted as worthily as she might have done, and had not played the game as well as she might have done, and somehow it didn't all seem quite fair. End of chapter 3.